George Kilpatrick Inspiration for the Nation, celebrating people we feel good about. We continue our series celebrating Kwanzaa. This is day 4, Ujamaa, Cooperative Economics, to build and maintain our stores, shops, and other businesses, and to profit from them together as we celebrate Kwanzaa. And so what we've decided to do, as you have been noticing, is we have invited leaders within the community to share their thoughts about the Kwanzaa principles and how to make those Kwanzaa principles real in our life. We're pleased to be joined by Davine Bey, Head of Talent Management at Syracuse University, also a consultant with organizations helping them with their workforce needs. Davine, good to see you as always.
Good to see you as well, George. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So, Davine, this topic in particular was very important to you. Why?
Well, George, it's a great question because I think that we are at such an important point in our history as African Americans, as Black folk in this country, and we're making tremendous gains. Right? There are more African American entrepreneurs that are emerging. Black wealth is increasing, and as a result, there are just some things that I just observed anecdotally that I felt that I wanted to kind of weigh in on as we continue this upwardly mobile progress.
Yeah, and of course, cooperative economics is one way that we're going to build wealth in our communities. All right, so what's on your mind, brother? Let's go.
Yeah, so, the thing that I really just wanted to focus on during this conversation, George, was how we value one another, especially and in particular when it comes to Black economics. And, when I think about that, I think about, the mom and pop entrepreneurs that I grew up with growing up in Harlem. I think about all the successful businesses and friends that I've known that have built successful businesses. But the one thing that seems to be a common thread that I hear from those individuals, and I've experienced myself, is this sometimes this sense of devaluing each other in the marketplace. And let me give you an example of that. So let's say my good friend, George Kilpatrick, decides to open up a bakery here in town, and you're selling your grandmother's sacred sweet potato pie recipe for $10 a pie, right? Am I on mute? Oh.
Right. No, you're good.
Yeah. So, and so as a friend of George Kilpatrick, when I enter your store, the price of your $10 pie for Davine Bey is $10. Right?
Correct.
I should not come to you and say, "Hey, where's the hookup? Or can you help me out?" Right?
Right.
Your price is the price. And sometimes, I just watch how, sometimes people get offended by that, right? It's like, well, as if almost, there's this expectation that because the product is coming from you, that somehow intrinsically that translates that you should be reducing the value of your product and charging me a lesser price because.
Meanwhile, so in that context, but I'll go around the corner and pay double to somebody else, right? Break it down, brother, right?
Exactly. And then go to another merchant who not part of our community, don't haggle and will pay the full price.
Right. As I was thinking about that, this idea of valuing and how do we not only value our stuff, but also place value on it. And is that part of this? Okay, what comes up for me, maybe this is too heavy, too deep for what we're talking about, but I get this internalized oppression kind of thing, like even to the point that, do I even feel like I'm worth that? Is that along the lines of what you're thinking as well, or am I somewhere off in another planet?
Well, it's a great, question, George, and I'm certainly not a anthropologist or expert in that area. Right? I know my lane, but I would say that there's probably a lot of truth to what you're saying. I think that we have grown up in a society that doesn't place a lot of value on people who look like you and I.
Mm-hmm.
And we have learned those behaviors, and we evoke those behaviors onto ourselves. And
Mm-hmm.
so I do think that there is some historical reference of that, but I also think that there are people who understand that context and who are fighting against that. And this is not an aspersion on anyone. I think we've all been guilty of it. I mean, everyone wants a hookup, right? Everyone wants
Right.
to pay,
Well,
but
you asked the question, right? You asked the
right,
question.
right, right,
Right.
exactly. But I do think that we are at a point where we really have to put our money where our mouths are and begin to support our communities as other communities support their communities. And there's nothing wrong about that. There's nothing racist or wrong about that. That's just people circulating their dollars among their communities and raising the standard of living for the communities.
No, I really appreciate that. So when you think about that, you grew up in a community in Harlem, New York City, and certainly,
All up in the house.
represent, right? Um, and so how do we, as a Black community in particular, and these are the folks that I'm talking to, Davine, how do we as a Black community use this concept of cooperative economics, Ujamaa, to build wealth in our communities? We're this conversation is originating from Syracuse, New York, for example, and the over the years trying to center a community that will prosper has been challenging because of the high poverty rate in this particular community and the efforts underway to reverse that and to build a wealth legacy within our community, or at least a prosperous community. So how do you see this playing out in this idea and this concept of Ujamaa cooperative economics?
I think it's a multi-pronged approach, George. I believe that one, we have to be very intentional about how and where we spend our dollar. And what I mean by that is, seeking out those who look like us. I think that we have to be mindful that there may be some of that historical residue that exists within our minds. So as we're approaching and dealing with one another, we have to be able to unpack that and be aware of that, right? It's kind of, it's that unconscious, thing that's buried deep in, but we know it comes somewhere. But I think the other end is true too. I think as a Black business owner, right, we have an obligation to step it up and to reinvest our resources back into our businesses to make our businesses attractive. And if we're going to charge a fair market price for what we deliver, then our services as Black business owners should also be on par with our counterparts as well.
Mm-hmm. So it's a both and, expect to be compensated fairly, but also deliver what you say you're going to deliver in a fair way. And I know that these concepts are important to you. We've seen when we identify and invest in our communities, there's evidence that this can work, right? We just have to be very intentional about it, as you said, to make that happen. And to me, it's very simple. Buy Black, right? And people say, well, when they hear that, they say, well, what is that discriminatory against other businesses? Well, it didn't say buy only Black; it just said buy Black, right?
Right.
And I'll give you an example. I remember I have a friend, and he's a Greek heritage, and he was taking me around to meet different people. Everybody was Greek. There wasn't any there was no apology. There was like, and this is this, and this is where I'm going to go, and this is where we're going to get this, and we're going to get that. Everybody, there was no apology for that. And so if our communities are going to prosper, we got to spend that money within our communities without apologies, and not saying that you're not going to buy other things everywhere else, because you need everything. You need some things from, and it doesn't matter. You're spreading the wealth, but at least start at home, is what we're saying. I guess is what I'm suggesting. Your thoughts about that?
I think that's a great point, George. And what I would add, as a Black business owner, I wouldn't only limit my services to Black people, right?
Right.
Because you're a very niche market, right? It's about competing in the marketplace.
In the
right?
marketplace,
And
right.
it's about competing in the marketplace. It's about understanding your marketplace.
Right.
Syracuse, New York, we do grapple with issues of poverty, but we have a pretty decent, sustainable middle and upper income, community that's here. Which there's a book called Black is the New Green.
Mm-hmm.
And the author refers to this population of Black folk as the triple A's. What's a triple A? Affluent African American, triple A.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
And
fluid African, yeah.
and an affluent African American household has an income of over $150,000.
Okay.
Well, there are a lot of triple A's in town, and there's room to create more. I think the other thing that I would say, because oftentimes out here, well, Syracuse is not New York. Very true. Apples and oranges, right? Most places are not like New York City. New York is very unique. But what I will say is that where Syracuse is at today, they're at the precipice of their journey and redevelopment. That's where Harlem was 30 years ago. Right. That's where the Bronx was 30 years ago, right? That's where Brooklyn was and other major cities. So the playbook has already been played out for us, today. And now we have an opportunity to really bring that institutional knowledge, bring those lessons learned to this community that we now call home.
Davine Bey, director of head, he said head. I'm just going to use that term, head of talent management at Syracuse University, and of course a consultant who works with individual workforce development. Anything else we need to know? Well, no, I shouldn't say anything else. So, what's our takeaway from today? What are folk going to do to actualize Ujamaa in our community going forward? What's your recommendation and suggestion?
My recommendation is let's deal with each other with grace, right? Let's be intentional how we spend our resources among each other, and let's always strive to deliver excellence as Black business owners.
Ujamaa, Cooperative Economics, Davine Bey on Inspiration for the Nation. Thank you, brother.
Thank you, George. I appreciate being on.
Happy Kwanzaa.
Happy Kwanzaa. Happy Kwanzaa, brother. Take care.